was exactly 7 years old when my world became a suitcase. I remember the smell of my mom's perfume, that expensive floral stuff, as she knelt down in the driveway. She told me she was going on a special project for work and that she'd be back by my birthday. That was 22 years ago. My birthday came and went, then Christmas, then middle school, high school, and a college graduation where my seat for mother stayed cold and empty. My Aunt Sarah was the one who stepped up. She never badmouthed my mom, not once. She just used to say, "Honey, some people are born with a compass, and some people are just born to be the wind." I eventually found out the truth through an old Facebook post. My mother hadn't left for a job. She'd left for a man named Julian, a guy with a penthouse in Chicago, a boat in the Keys, and a very, very strict no-kids policy. She chose the penthouse. She chose the boat. She chose him. Then, last Tuesday, at 3 in the morning, my doorbell started screaming. I opened it, and for a second, I didn't even recognize the woman standing there. Her hair was brittle, her designer coat was stained, and the wind had clearly stopped blowing in her favor. "Leo?" she whispered. Her voice sounded like broken glass. "Leo, baby, it's me." She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about Aunt Sarah. She just collapsed into my hallway. Apparently, Julian had traded her in for a newer model. He'd signed the prenup, locked the accounts, and tossed her out like last week's trash. She had no money, no friends, and nowhere to go, because she'd burned every bridge she ever crossed 22 years ago. Against every ounce of common sense I possessed, I let her stay. I thought, maybe this is the redemption arc. Maybe she's changed. I was wrong. Within 3 days, she was complaining about the cheap brand of coffee I bought. She was borrowing $20 bills from my wallet while I showered. And when I finally sat her down and told her she needed to look for a job, any job, she lost it. "You are my mother," she screamed. "I gave you life." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "No, you gave me an inheritance of silence. Aunt Sarah gave me a life." I told her she had until Monday to pack her bags. I woke up Sunday morning to the sound of sirens. 2 police cruisers were idling at the curb. I walked out, confused, only to see my mother sitting on the curb, sobbing, with a massive purple bruise blooming under her left eye and red marks around her wrists. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "He did it," she wailed to the officers. "I asked him for help and he snapped. He attacked me." My heart hit the floor. I felt the cold metal of handcuffs before I could even process the lie. The officers were stone-faced. "Son, we're going to need you to come with us. Your mother has filed a formal statement of felony assault." I felt the world closing in. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see a mother. I saw a predator. She wasn't crying because she was hurt. She was smiling behind her tissues because she thought she'd found a way to extort a settlement out of me. She wanted my house. She wanted my savings. She wanted revenge for me not being her safety net. But here's the thing about being an architect. I'm obsessed with security. "Officer," I said, my voice remarkably calm, "before you put me in that car, look at the eaves of the roof, right above the porch." The cop looked up. A tiny 4K Nest camera was blinking a steady, rhythmic blue. That camera records 24/7, and it's cloud synced. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, but I found the footage from an hour ago. The officers gathered around the screen. The video showed my mother standing alone on the porch. It showed her taking a heavy brass decorative bird from my planter and slamming it into her own face. It showed her grabbing her own wrists and twisting hard while she looked at her reflection in the window, practicing her scream. The silence that followed was deafening. The officer looked at my mother. Then he looked at the brass bird still sitting in the dirt. Then he looked at me. "Uncuff him," he muttered. My mother's face went from victim to ghost in 3 seconds flat. She tried to run, but they caught her before she reached the sidewalk. Filing a false police report, especially one involving domestic violence, is a serious crime in this state. But doing it to your own kid, that's a special kind of dark. As he loaded her into the back of the cruiser, she looked at me through the window. She didn't look sorry. She just looked angry that she'd been caught. I watched the red and blue lights fade into the distance. Aunt Sarah called me an hour later. She'd heard through the grapevine. "Leo," she said softly, "are you okay?" I looked at the suitcase my mother had left in the hall, the same suitcase she'd arrived with. "Yeah, Sarah," I said, finally breathing. The wind just finally stopped blowing. I walked to the door, locked the deadbolt, and for the first time in